Oops. Oh, there's 3 people watching already.
One of them is me.
Me too.
So we're watching ourselves. Great.
Welcome, everyone.
A question.
Oh, we got a question already. Oops. Oh, yes, this will be recorded. This is being recorded, and it is being streamed on YouTube if you all would like to share it with your folks who aren't able to join on the Zoom today. Melanie, can you reshare the YouTube? Oh yeah, Jenny, thank you so much. Okay. So we'll just wait a few minutes for more folks to flow in. Hi, Sherry.
I appreciate the comment on the Ohlone land, Diana.
Oh, yes, we'll definitely introduce that. Melanie's going to start us off too in a few minutes. I also have to say there's a community art event happening at Portsmouth Square, so I'm not sure how many people
I
will
saw
join
that,
us.
yeah. The Chinese Cultural Center was also sending out a call for art and creative stuff to be on out there.
Yeah, but we're grateful for folks who can join us today. And Bob's here. Hi, Bob. I'm just saying hi to people in the attendees list. We'll start in maybe at 2:05, just to wait for a few more folks. Okay, so we'll let folks flow in as they come. Melanie, if you want to get started.
Yeah, let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie Alvena. I'm the Programs Manager and Communications Manager at the Asian American Women Artists Association. And I just want to thank all of you for coming today. We're really proud to present this very special artist panel and discussion. Before we get started, though, I just wanted to set some ground rules and point out some housekeeping items in the Zoom room. For those of you in the room with us today, there are automatic live captions available if you need access to them at the bottom of your Zoom window. There you can click on the CC button and select show captions to view them if you need them. Just so everyone knows, this event is also being recorded and live streamed to our YouTube channel. Jenny is sharing the link if you want to share it with some of your friends who didn't register ahead of time as well. In the chat. And then if you have any questions for any of the artists in today's program, there will also be time for a Q&A at the end. And you can submit your questions through the Q&A button or through the chat at any time. So please go ahead and use that. We also want to acknowledge the privilege for being able to host this event online and for us to gather virtually on this Saturday afternoon. If we find that anyone is being disruptive or disrespectful in the chat, we will give you a warning and remove you from the Zoom if the situation calls for it. But I hope we don't have to do that today. I also want to take a moment to honor the fact that I am tuning in from unceded Ohlone land. And we want to name and honor the stolen Indigenous lands we reside on and recognize the agency of Native peoples who continue to steward the histories and futures of these places. So we invite you all to share where you are coming from in the chat as well. And I just want to say that I'm grateful for my staff, volunteers, and board members who are here, especially Diana Lee, who is helping kind of co-moderate and with the back end. We also have volunteers, Jenny He and Daniel Dow, who's helping. I saw Sherry was in the room as well, one of our board members. Michelle Lee, our board president, I think is also here today too. So I just want to say thank you for being here and for the support. And then I'm going to pass the mic now to Diana, who will share some announcements and introduce our program for today.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Hi. Thanks, Melanie. First, I want to acknowledge the raw pain and the grief that many of us have been feeling and experiencing over the past week in response to the violence that has occurred in Georgia, and also the white supremacist bias in the coverage of it that has ultimately belittled and silenced the lives and voices of the victims, including the 6 Asian women. And if you are in need of any additional resources or want to send your support to organizations working to stop the hate and fight for our rights of our communities, we've offered a list at the link Jenny is going to paste into the chat. And this list includes resources to collective statements, groups that support Asian and migrant sex worker rights, reporting and community safety resources, and a number of API-led organizations and legal services that you can learn more about and send your support to, or even look into volunteering at as well. So definitely click on that link and see where you can send your support. During this program, the Chinese Progressive Association in San Francisco Chinatown is also organizing From the Bay to Atlanta, a community art event at Portsmouth Square. And that's also in solidarity with our Asian and Asian American women and the communities that are under attack. So if you find yourself in the area, you can support by showing up. There, you can show up there as well. But we're grateful for your presence here today for this panel that we are presenting. As we offer ourselves a moment to grieve and process the continued hate and violence happening in our communities, this tragic moment in particular also sheds light on the overlooked history of discrimination and fetishization of Asian and Asian American women and women of color. So we arrive here knowing that this kind of violence is not new. But with that said, we also would not be able to gather here without the legacies of Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color and the continued fight for racial and social justice in our communities. And there's a history of leadership and activism and resistance that has worked to empower and inspire us to speak truth and reclaim our voice and whatnot. So today we hope that this panel will also highlight how art plays a significant role in doing just that, empowering our voices, making sure Asian American women are heard. And so I'm really excited to present it. But before we do that, I just want to do a few more announcements before we get started. I'm going to share my screen because AWA has a number of events that we are putting on in celebration of Asian American, or of Women's History Month. And so yesterday we hosted Illuminate, a poetry and open mic reading, and it was co-organized by one of our Emerging Curators Program fellows, Lauren Ito, and Greer, who you'll also hear from today, who's one of the panelists. And it was a much needed program. Over 300 people joined us on Zoom and on YouTube. So if we invite you to watch and share that recording through the link that Jenny is pasting into the chat as well. Next week on Saturday, we're also hosting our annual Slide Slam, and which features over 10 artists who will present their work in a rapid fire format of four slides in 4 minutes. So it's a very exciting event, and we hope you come and witness that. And then the following day, Papadum, our other emerging curator show, curated by Kamardeep Singh, is opening in the windows of iHotel Manila Town Center. And then during APA Heritage Month in May, we'll be presenting our next big exhibition at the Somarts Cultural Center, Sewing Agency. And that's in partnership with the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center for their annual United States of Asian America Festival. So I hope you can join us at any one of these events. I know that's a lot of info, so please definitely subscribe to our newsletter to get updates. And if you're interested in learning more about AWA, you can visit us at awa.net, or you can also consider becoming a member with us at members.awa.net. But without further ado, I do want to introduce the moderator for today's panel and the author of the book, Local Invisibility, Postcolonial Feminisms. Laura Fantone is an Italian political and social scientist. She holds an MA in Gender and Women's Studies and a PhD in social research. Her research and activism revolve around immigration, forced migration, and refugees and urban issues, gender equality, technology, and diversity. She works at the University of California, Berkeley. Her recent publications include Local Invisibility on Asian American feminist artists in California, Queer and Postcolonial Feminisms, 2 documentaries on globalization and anti-fascism, Re-Sisters and Resistance, both available online. And you can learn more about Laura's work and writing at the links Jenny is pasting into the chat as well. And this event, as y'all can see, is inspired by the book she released in 2018, Local Invisibility, Postcolonial Feminisms, which also features a chapter on AWA and several interviews with many significant Asian American women artists of our time, including AWA's co-founder, Flo Oi Wong, our previous board president, Cynthia Tom, and one of the people who helped make AWA a nonprofit, Nancy Hom, who is here as a speaker today. And if you're interested in learning more about the book or purchasing it, you can visit this link that Jenny is also pasting into the chat and use this discount code that is available until April 12th. So definitely get on that. Tell your professors, tell your colleagues, let them know. This is definitely a resource for art and women's studies and Asian American studies. So definitely share that. But with that, I'm super grateful to pass the mic to Laura, who will introduce the artist for today and moderate the conversation. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you, everyone. I'm just super grateful to be in this space, given that we were gonna present this book a year ago, and COVID happened, and we were all in lockdown, and we all are here. We all survived a year later, and yet we are facing something scary, especially physical violence that a lot of Asian Americans have experienced. So the context of this conversation has changed dramatically, and I'm very grateful to Diane and Ewa for deciding to hold this event and to maintain the importance of art and culture as a ground for political activism and political visibility. I want to really leave all the space to the artists to speak about their own work. And I'm very excited that there are 3 generations, multiple generations. A lot of times AY and their initiatives tend to highlight the gender diversity, the ethnic and national diversity within AWA. But I think one of the greatest strengths that we have is the intergenerational community, even right now, in front of this moment of great violence. So that's the context. I just want to say something about why this Italian social scientist is here. I came in a moment in which Italy experienced a backlash against Chinese communities. And at the same time, there was a great attention in the art institution for Asian art, Japanese, Korean, Chinese especially. And I came to California thinking, given that there is such a great and well-established historically Asian American community from 150 years ago, and even South Asian communities, I expected to find a great deal of leadership and presence of Asian artists. And the book that I wrote came from that question. Why, given that large established community is here, the audience is here, there is a history, why is it that so many Asian American artists do not receive visibility and are not widely present in the California art institutions, especially in the Bay Area? And that's where my question started. Of course, now the question is not just invisibility, but also subject to oppression, right? We can translate that question in a deeper way. Why is it that the vast Asian American community, in a place like California, is subject to such forms of oppression, and not just symbolic violence of being invisible, but physical violence? So there will be a lot, I hope, in the Q&A about this question of different kinds of visibility, different kinds of representation, what it means to be in this space. I'm gonna leave now the floor to the youngest person and the youngest artist, Greer Nakadagawali, who is 16-year-old and a junior at Oakland Technical High School. She has written a poem every day for over 2 years. So that means she started when she was 14. That's amazing. And she's already, as of 2020, the Oakland Youth Poet Laureate. She has a book, A Heart Full of Hallways. You can order it on Nomadic Press. And Greer, I heard her speaking last night with a great, powerful voice of describing films, how films erase Asian American women's experience. Her poems are a critical examination of the world around us, but also an intimate exploration of her deepest thoughts and experiences. So thank you, Greer, for being here.
Thank you for the introduction, Laura, and thank you for your work. That's really powerful. So I just wanted to talk a little about the art I do. I do some visual illustration and I do some poetry. I've actually been doing the drawing longer. This piece here was from a school assignment where our teacher asked like to do a piece that conveys what our art is about. And for me, my visual art has a lot of fantasy elements. I take a lot of inspiration from comic artists. I would say like Tilly Walden and Fiona Staples and Rosemary Valero O'Connell are my biggest inspirations visually. Yeah, that's really all I had to say about that piece. I really wanted to share 2 poems with you guys today. I'll start with one and then see if we have time for the other one. But this one is called Tourist, and it's about sort of the experiences of like alienation I have from my own culture as an Asian American person. Yeah. As if my whole body is just surface. As if I could peel away my skin, as if I could strip away, as if removing parts would somehow make me into who I was always meant to be. A child of spirit, a child of trees flowering out of my fingernails, rows of classrooms, rows of offices all stacked up in my straight spine. A child of a nation, a child whose body is a nation. I want to be who I was always meant to be. Some days I am all body. I am all stomach, all knuckles and knees and dead skin. Other days I am the great-granddaughter of a country in which I am a tourist. I could say I am just an American tourist in Japan, but that's not the full story. The truth is I am always a tourist in my own body. And America, her soil knows this about me, that I am not a child of spirit. I am flesh and blood and hers in all my colors. And despite it all, I do not think she wants me if I'm like this. Even though generations of my family have made me America's daughter, I still cry for phantom limbs. I still hurt as though my skeleton belongs somewhere else, for countries I can never call home. Sometimes I feel more split than mixed. Explosions defining the strongest borders in my blood. And in this way, I am a child of nations. In this way, my body understands more about history than I ever will. Thank you. Do I have time for a second poem? I don't want to eat into the...
Yeah, you can go ahead and read your second one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for acknowledging what happened in Atlanta, Diana. I wrote the second piece a while ago, before that event, but it just is like so startlingly relevant. It's the one that Laura mentioned I read last night about how we treat women of color in film and in media, and how we like use them as props in like in like white men's stories. And yeah, it's disheartening to see it happen so perfectly encapsulated in real life. This poem is called From the Director's Chair. All my skin is on the cutting room floor. You're the director and you're cropping the shot. You're the director and you're crossing names out of the script in your red pen that marks up history and scrawls out the inconvenient parts. But we lived too. Every other piece of the color spectrum. We lived and we had our love stories and we had children. We built monuments out of our neighborhoods. The way we waved and smiled on the street and knocked on each other's doors in times of crisis, we lived too. You're the director and you're telling a story about the glory of war, about heroes. You're the director and you're telling a story about a good, honest man who falls in love with a beautiful foreign woman, but you don't find it necessary for the audience to hear her voice. How do I tell the director that she lived too? I tell him, I say, she sees through her own eyes. When she lifts her arm, it moves. She did not wait, preserved in amber, for your protagonist to press play on her life and make her dance around the room. And you're the director. You say, every story needs subjects, and every story needs objects. And I point to all the crossed out faces, all the skin on the cutting room floor, and say, but we are never the subjects. But we lived too, even though no one bothered to teach you that sometimes we lived and it was bloody, bloody work. We lived when no one else wanted us to. We lived despite the voices in our heads trying to colonize the body, trying to leach the color out onto the sheets, trying to make us let go of the past and dizzy us with the colorblind future. But we lived, the tired and the angry and the hungry for stories like ours. We lived too. Thank you all so much.
So this was amazing. I am also excited to introduce Menaja Ganesh, who is a South Asian diasporic artist now in California, attending CCA. Her descent is northern and southern India and eastern. Their work lies in the understanding of intersection between language and presentation, queerness and femininity, familiarity and loss. Their work is in honor of their ancestors, the hundreds of years of knowledge, labor, toiling, and excellence which brings them here today. Menaja's process of making the work engages the body, space, conception, storytelling, all the way to the physical production. Their work bridges between graphic design, spatial installations, curatorial practices of bookmaking, printmaking, performance, writing, and it is all rooted in ceremony. They believe that the theme of the ritual, nurturing, and healing is very heavily rooted in a corporeal sense and needs to be shared with others. Menaja was also in the Papadam Ewa show, curated by Karmadik Singh. I leave the floor to me.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to point out that my pronouns are they, them. I am an artist. I'm currently based out of San Francisco and Oakland, and I just wanted to share some of my work. I make a lot of books, and this is one piece that was very personal and a very intimate project that I did, and it dealt a lot.
Your video is off. If you want to show yourself,
I'd rather leave my video off if that's okay.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So this piece was incredibly private and personal in a sense. It's one of the smallest books I've ever made, and it dealt with just like the difficulty of like communication across borders and the maintenance of relationships with people like across lands, across oceans, and just how like fleeting these communications can be. And it was really important for me to document it in this manner. Could I go to the next slide, please? This was another book that I'd done, and it combined old photographs of different women in my family, as well as some writing that I'd done based on certain incidents that I remembered related to each of these women. And this one was specifically about my grandmother and about a ritual that she would perform where she feeds the crows every morning. And because we consider the crows to be our ancestors in the South. And this book was called Colorized. It was, it dealt with gender and femininity and like gender roles that women are expected to abide by in my home country, just as well as the idea of diaspora and migration. It was interesting because I was using a lot of black and white photographs, but I was trying to reimagine them in color for the purpose of this book, just as a way to, I guess, like put new associations to old memories. Could I go to the next slide, please? This piece was it was like an installation and a performance and a video. So there were a lot of different components to it, but it also did deal with the like the ritual of feeding the crows. And it was more, this piece was completely in honor of my ancestors, of my lineage, and the women and the energies that have nurtured me and supported me just during my time on Earth. And it also dealt a lot with just adornment and the entire process of like adorning myself, of like putting on this version of femininity that I can really gain power from, and doing it all in honor of my ancestors, feeding them with my hands, sitting down, praying with them, eating with them, just holding space with them, honestly. And the next slide, please. This was another installation that I'd done that was in my, it was in my window, and it was during the pandemic. And it was really just a way for me to share my work with just people outside, and during a time when it was very difficult to share work. So I was really just re-envisioning what publishing looks like in a sense, and just sharing really personal work that related to my language, to my ancestors, to my family, in ways where I had a lot of agency as well. And the next slide. This is the final piece that I'm going to share today, and it's actually an ongoing project. It's untitled at the moment, and this is in collaboration with a very close friend of mine as well. And this piece kind of deals with ancestral knowledge. It's a video and an installation. It's actually, the video is projected over cutouts, like over stencils that have type on them. And this piece again deals with adornment, but it also deals with ancestral knowledge and just those like very westernized beauty standards that people are expected to just abide by or to have in my home country as well as over here. And yeah, so this is an ongoing project right now. It just deals with the contradictions between like honoring our ancestors and their knowledge, as well as like being able to be critical of them when they are more colonial. So yeah, that's all the work I wanted to show, and I'm very happy, and I'm very happy to be able to share it with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Menaja. Stunning. The mirrors, I would like to hear more, maybe at some point. And then we're gonna introduce the last girl, Nancy Hom, who was born in Toisan, in China, southern China, and raised in New York City, and has been part of the Bay Area art scene since 1974. I think she created many iconic images that resonate through different cultural spaces and events, political issues, social justice issues across the Bay Area and anywhere else. She created posters, poetry, illustrations, installations, recently large mandalas, and used her heart to affirm stories, struggles, and contribution of many oppressed communities of color. Nancy has been also a curator and pushed a lot of artistic boundaries. And with that, creating with AWA and other organizations, really helping the growth of at least 10 more Bay Area artist organizations, from Kiernister's workshop to Asian American Women Artists Association to many more. I leave it to her.
Hi, everybody. So 5 minutes to tell my story. I think it can all be encapsulated in this mandala that I created. It's only 3 feet, but it tells my whole life story of being born in China, of humble means, and then moving to New York City and becoming involved in the Asian American movement in the beginning, and then coming to San Francisco, where I was introduced to the silkscreen medium, and transitioning into sculpture, and finally embarking on the Buddhist path, which has now informed my artwork and my life. Next slide, please. So some of my work in the beginning and throughout deals with this conflicted identity between being raised as a very traditional Chinese and upbringing to a multicultural identity that I feel today, being influenced by many cultures. Next slide. So that is the same mandala. I started with all Chinese things, and then I changed it periodically through the exhibition to reflect all the different cultures that I've been exposed to in the Bay Area. Next slide. And the same theme too of being in a very traditional setting, kind of almost oppressive in a way, but also coming out of that and being influenced by many cultures. Different people donated the cloths that I made for this quilt, which all my installations I've never done before. I just took it on and saw what came out of that. Next slide. I'm probably known half and half for my mandala work and my silkscreen work. This was a mural actually commissioned by Renee Yanez of the Galleria de la Raza. And it encapsulates what I like most, which is to do posters on celebrating our cultures, but not just my culture, but different cultures. So there are 3 cultures represented. I do a lot of imagery on dance and carnival and celebrating everything that is positive about people of color. Next slide. I also create some works pointing to the issues of the day. This was done when Vincent Chin was killed by 2 racists who beat him with a baseball bat. So I put the slide in because I wanted to illustrate that it's not a new thing what we're experiencing today, but it has been going on for a long time, and artists have responded to it for a long time too. So this one is called No More Violence Against Asians. Unfortunately, we're still seeing that today. Next slide. And the last slide is not just local issues, but it's a whole world issue that we're all responsible for what happens in the world. So this is a plea for no more Hiroshimas, Nagasaki's, because we don't want to promote anything that will destroy not only people, but the entire planet. And it's a very deep issue in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. It's hard to follow these incredible images and put ourselves back in the screen. It is my task to move now towards the section of the artist panel conversation and discussion. And I'm sure everyone has a lot to say to each other. Again, I just I just want to thank all of you for bringing different dimensions, layers, themes, and spatial geographical differences and stories. I feel like this really reflects the richness of AWA. So I can start with a couple of questions since we ended up on a couple of slides about from Nancy's presentation that really refers to violence and death. And I'm thinking, what does the good way to start and a broad way to start would be to consider what does the label Asian American mean to all of you in this dark moment of violence across the country, considering that AWA always promoted a very wide notion of pan-ethnic inclusive idea of Asian America and inclusive idea of gender. Who wants to go first?
Well, if I may, you know, the term Asian American was coined back at a time when we didn't have any other description for ourselves besides our ethnic identity. And I remember people saying, well, we should assert that we're Asian American. You know, we're not just Chinese or Japanese or Korean. We are American. So it's an affirmative term that people used, and it was in the 70s when we were all very much into asserting our identity and finding a place in it. But now I feel that the term Asian American also qualifies us. We're always, you know, we're Asian American. We're not American. You know, I think of this Malaysian director who's ethnically Chinese, and somebody asked him about that. You know, aren't you Chinese Malaysian? And he said, I'm Malaysian. I don't relate to China. I don't speak the language. I'm not part of that culture. And I thought about that, you know, because nowadays it seems like it's one more thing that keeps us apart, you know, that, oh, there's African American, there's Chinese American, Japanese American, but there's not French American or Scottish American. They're not hyphenated, we are. So it kind of feels these days a little bit more oppressive. And if you want to call me, maybe you should call me American Chinese with the American first, because I don't speak Chinese either and don't have ties, besides being born there, don't have much ties to that country.
Yeah, Nancy, I really relate to a lot of what you said about it feeling like they're trying, like the intent of that label sort of seems like to separate us from other Americans. I also don't have a lot of connection to, I am Chinese American and Japanese American, and that is how I describe myself. But I don't speak either of the languages. I don't have that much connection to either of the cultures, frankly, which has been like a source of pain for me in my life. But it is still the label that I would prefer is Asian American personally, although I can't say if that's just because I grew up with it and I got used to it. Yeah, or if it's actually because it's the best way to describe me.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting for me to think about this question as well, because I was thinking about it earlier today when I was filling out a form, and it asked for my race as well as my ethnicity. And first of all, like, it was just a really weird question to be asked at all. But then, like, I had to look it up because I wasn't specifically sure. And they were just like, okay, well, if you're Indian or South Asian, your race would be Asian. And it just like, it made me think so much about like all of the forms that I've filled out in the past living in this country as an immigrant. Because like, especially with the term Asian American, like I'm not American, but I do live here and I am trying to build a home here. So it's complicated, definitely. And then on the other hand, I feel like just with the word Asian used as such a blanket term overall, like when people say Asian, like I'm automatically admitted as a part of like as a subgroup of that, even though I'm not the one that they would think of immediately. Like I'm not, if they looked at me, like they wouldn't associate me with the term Asian, even though like I am technically from the continent of Asia, I'm South Asian. So I feel like just with that category, like I feel like it's hard to think of it for me specifically as something other than just a category that I fill out on like any form. It's not something that I can connect with in that manner because I feel like it's very exclusionary to me and to other South Asians also. Like I'm sure there are many who've like been able to find comfort in that term. But yeah, I feel like for me, it feels much more like a blanket term and it's not something that I can necessarily associate with.
Yeah.
Those are great differences. I love that. And you know, how does it resonate in different contexts? Another theme that I think emerged, and it could be really timely to address, is the role of your vision of freedom, solidarity, and oppression. How do you speak of it? We see it, we hear it in your short presentations, but related to that, how do you relate to the BIPOC art and activism more generally? Any takers?
Yeah, I looked at this question and I was thinking, I think it's all about asserting your right to exist, you know. All these struggles are about having freedoms that we don't have right now due to somebody or some entity trying to impose their will on us. But I couldn't quite articulate it, except that I found a poem that I wrote. And so if I may, I want to read just an excerpt from it, because it shows where I am coming from in terms of relationship to all these other struggles. And it's a poem I wrote for Yuri Kochiyama, taking a quote from her, who said, "We are all part of one another." We are all part of one another. To be part of one another is to know that when you breathe, I heave with you. And when you sigh, I cry beside you. We are breath and water, each of us passing from one vessel to another in the mandala of life. Knowing this, we would delve into the deepest part of ourselves to see the brilliance inside others. We would be more careful with words and protest deeds that hurt and harm. We would guard the earth as if it were our hallowed home. Knowing we are not separate is how we fight for freedom and justice, with fierce rage cupped in compassion. For we cannot be free if one of us is not. We cannot reap riches if one of us has none. We cannot fully love if one of us is hated. Beyond her life, Yuri's words live on in every continent, every country, every town. We are all part of one another. rise up and fight as one. That's all I have to say for it.
Wow, that's beautiful, Nancy. Thank you for sharing that. I think in relation to this question, I, for the longest time, didn't think of myself as experiencing any oppression, which is because I do benefit from a lot of privilege. I benefit from colorism. I benefit from having double eyelids and things like that, and speaking English with an American accent. So I felt like I could sort of blend in with like white friends and white classmates. And not that I thought of myself as white, but just that I didn't see that the difference could be like hurtful. And then as I got older and I had more conversations with white friends and white classmates, and I started to realize that they actually didn't understand my experience, and it was quite different from theirs. And I realized that in time, some of them realized that they could weaponize the harassment and fetishization of Asian women against me, which was sort of like hurtful and like damaging to find out when I couldn't even like have access to my own culture in a way. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes.
I guess on oppression and solidarity, I like first and foremost really have to answer this question from like more of an India specific perspective. Like it really makes me think of just all the intersections that I live within and that so many other people live within in India, like just in terms of thinking about caste, class, and then even like regions, and just especially for me because I am of mixed heritage within India. Half of my family is from the north, while the other half is from the south. And my families are all also of different social castes. And basically all of these things completely change people's perspective of you and people's perception of you in society. And it changes how you're treated in society. Because like my family in the south is much more dark skinned than my family in the north. But my family in the north is also a much lower caste than my family in the south. So like all of these different things, when it's interesting because I feel like I embody all of these different intersections and all these experiences of my family, like having this mixed heritage and being able to experience these things firsthand. So just I feel like coming from a country that is so fragmented in so many ways, like regionally it's fragmented through languages, through caste, through class. And these are institutions that have been in place like for centuries before the British were even there, like even across religion for that matter. So I feel like if anything, like for me, like the first step towards solidarity is acknowledging these intersections and also acknowledging my privilege wherever it exists, and just paying my respects to the native peoples of the lands that I'm originally from, also to the Chapal people in West Bengal, on the land where I've grown up, the land that's seen me grow up, as well as acknowledging the privilege that I have in being able to immigrate to the United States and to get this arts education and to be able to be in community with so many incredible artists over here. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
I really admire that recognition of history that you have. I think that's like super important. That's something I'm like striving to have more of. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of you in different ways talk about the relation to ancestry, family migration, stories of diaspora. Do you find, so in that part of your voice, is there a sense of empowerment? Who are you speaking to when you speak about that family history, when you decide to put that family history out in your art? What kind of changes do you inspire? Do you wish to inspire when you put out that family history out to your audience?
Something I found out like kind of recently about my family is, well, I knew that my grandfather had been in the Japanese internment camps during World War II, but what I didn't know is that sometime after he was released as he was released as a college student, and then once he was an adult, something my dad told me recently was that he actually went into elementary schools and like taught the children there about his experiences and what had happened to him. And it was just so moving to me to find out that like he wanted to make sure that this story and like what happened to his family and like the people around him wasn't forgotten. Yeah, I think that act of like trying to preserve like a legacy and make sure that like people know what their country did like is really important to me.
I think family stories, it's just not our family, but a lot of people went through what they went through. So it becomes part of our ethnic heritage. I use family stories a lot, partly to process what happened to me as a child. You're always trying to grapple with your upbringing and whether it was good or bad and trying to break out of it. There's always like this rebellious part that says, well, I started here and then I broke out and like Greer, just kind of trying to assert who I am, or who I truly am, which can be in disconnect with what they want us to be. Mm-hmm. And yet also is honoring what they went through and what and what their ancestors went through and all the rest of it, the classic immigrant story. And knowing that helps us with our compassion toward our parents or grandparents, and kind of builds that thread, which I think we need in order to feel whole as people. And so it's very important, the family stories, even if your art is not all about that, it's very important to at least know who you are.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate what both of you said in regards to that. That really, really resonates with me. I think for me, it's really hard to talk about this in like a concise manner because somewhere it's so difficult for me to navigate that idea of what's personal and what's shared, like, or what's public in that manner, because like so much of my work deals with personal stories, personal histories that are related to my family and to the lands that I come from in so many different ways. And just even when I deal with the idea of grief or the concept of grief in my work or mourning, like it's hard to navigate how to mourn like within myself internally and how to mourn in a more public manner, in a more performative manner when it comes to creating the work itself. But like I've said already, like a lot of like all of my work is in honor of my ancestors. It is in honor of my own goddesses and of the energies that have sustained me, that have brought me here. Like so much of my work is just a love letter to my hometown. And it's difficult when like being in a program that is so majorly white and so majorly male centric, and just it's just so it's difficult to navigate those spaces and make that work in a manner where it can be for me, but when the audience just wants it to be made in a way that's digestible, which oftentimes means watering it down or diluting it a lot. So it's definitely a lot to navigate in an academic context, I think, but I think I'm learning to do that better, or I've learned to do that better over the last 4 years, and really be able to honor those family stories when they are so much, like, such an integral part of the work that I do.
Yeah. Menaja, when we're talking about like ancestry, I'm reminded of that piece you were talking about where you said you were working with like older like black and white photos, but you chose to put them in color to like show something else about like the memory of it. I'm just wondering if there's anything else you can say about that, because I'm so interested to hear about that piece.
Yeah, that piece, it took a long time for me to kind of like envision and then start creating, and it was a huge process of kind of like speaking with family back home and gathering the photos and sitting down to actually write the stories. And it was so fulfilling in so many ways, but also so draining, I guess, in so many ways, to find those photos and to try and restore them, because like a lot of them were really poor quality because they were really old and dusty. But like I felt that somewhere when I was able to like flatten them almost, and to like, in a way it flattened it, but it also, I felt like, added more dimension, like a new sense of dimension to it with that color, because it was so saturated. And I feel like a lot of the time we associate like a lot of, like, especially in movies or films, like older movies from different decades, like we'll like associate that decade with like a certain kind of like color or tint because how they're like most commonly color graded in movies. And that was something I was thinking of a lot when I was colorizing those photographs, because like in my head, these are all stories that I've heard so many times, like repeatedly. And I feel like the way I think about them or visualize them is probably so different from the way that like my grandmother lived them or the way that my mother heard about them. And I was just thinking a lot about those associations and how to like visualize or like actualize my associations to those stories, and to just document them and archive them in very tangible ways, just as like pieces of history to hold on to, I think. Yeah, thank you so much for asking about it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna just close. And last question that's kind of inspired from this last conversation you were having with Menaja and the difficulties. I guess the broad question is, what needs to change in terms of leaving behind the struggles of Asian American, especially gender minorities? AWA started as committed to strengthening a Pan-Asian community of artists, but where else can we find support? What needs to happen for Asian Americans to thrive, artists especially, to be visible, fully recognizing their multiple identities? And here I'm thinking of Menaja's comment on being in an art school and struggling with that. But of course, what needs to change is a very big question that we all have in mind right now in the broader sense of community visibility and
well, I mean, it goes on so many levels, you know. Other cultures have become more visible, but there is a reason for that. There's an ecosystem built in with curators, buyers of art, teachers who bring in, like you, Laura, teachers who bring in conversations and people and exposure to women artists. So there's that part of it, building the ecosystem. We need more Asian American curators and buyers and stuff. And then there is the advocacy aspect and the coalition building that must be done. And I was thinking about this last night, and suddenly the children's book, Swimmy, came to mind. And I have this very visual vision of so by yourself, you're a little fish, but together, if you form the shape of a bigger fish, people will pay attention. And that's why I join so many groups and start so many groups, is because by banding together an AWA, Kearney Street Workshop, and APIC, all these groups help build that bigger fish. It's not like the fish is absorbed and becomes something else. Everyone is distinct. But if you come together, you make a bigger fish, and you can't help but be noticed. And even that may not be enough, so that the bigger fish might form together with other bigger fish groups to make an even gigantic fish that cannot be ignored at all. So that question of visibility is one of building connections, building community, building coalitions, and also across disciplines, and even besides the arts, because I'm not just an artist. I join other groups, to activist groups, and and I go to different ethnic activist groups or artist groups. Everything is all open and fluid, and we should be able to cross cultures and cross ties in order to build that bigger community.
Yeah, I love the idea of like us all forming together and building that bigger community, and also of having more Asian curators. I think that's super important. I also think that people who are not Asian sometimes need to learn how to appreciate Asian art in a way that is more respectful. Because sometimes I do see this distinctly like I do want to say like voyeuristic instinct with people talking about like Asian cultures that I like super don't appreciate, because it makes it seem like very foreign and very separate and very dehumanizing when analysis of our work could be doing a lot more to like show that our perspectives are like not so different, or like appreciate the differences instead of like making them seem like a bad thing. And then also I think that anything we do within our communities just needs to show respect to other people of color and like their experiences. That's really what I want to see from the Asian community, is like solidarity with Black Americans, with Latinx people, like with Indigenous communities. Like that's something I would love to see personally.
I agreed with everything you said. I don't think I have much else to add. Like, I feel like I've spoken a lot from like an India specific perspective, which is like, I guess it's like a little bit more difficult to talk about without context. But yeah, I think in the context of the US, I agree with everything you said.
So we just need to build the ecosystem that can sustain the whale, and demolishing Eurocentric patriarchal art, and make sure that, right, the BIPOC people are visible. Is that the agenda for next week?
Yeah, we should be able to get that done on like a Thursday.
Well, with that, I think we can open the panel to the attendees, and I just want to thank Greer, Nancy, Menaja for their amazing work, sensibility, insights, and generosity in sharing about what they do. Thank you again. So I guess questions can be typed in the chat or typed in the Q&A. So we can voice the audience questions. Like,
one question that came up, everyone, in the chat from earlier, somebody asked, Nancy, you read from, I think you said it was an excerpt from your poem. Somebody was asking if that was published anywhere or if they could see that poem anywhere.
No, it's not published yet. I have read it several times, but it hasn't been published.
There's a question in the chat. How does your art create a bridge for ideas and reflection between activism to people who aren't involved and engaged in activism?
Sorry, our art specifically or art in general?
Your art.
That's a lot harder for me to answer.
Sorry, Laura, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, one of the questions in the chat is, how does your art create a bridge for ideas between activism, for ideas of activism for people who aren't involved or engaged in activism already? The problem of making political art without kind of politicized, I guess. That's maybe another way to think about it. The feminist bridge concept resonates here a lot, bridging different communities and different discourses.
I guess for me, the word activism kind of always scares me a little bit. It assumes something else other than what I care about. And all throughout, I've only done stuff that I care about. And because I care about so many different things, I care about the planet, I care about what happens to people, I care about justice for people, I care about different countries and different, everything is open. And then people see that as an activist art piece. And whereas I'm just expressing something from the heart. I once gave a talk where I said protest is really pro-love. Yes, I'm protesting something, but the root of it is I'm protesting something because I love. It comes out of a place of love. And as far as how I use the art, I remember I was at Mission Graphica printing up a poster about a woman. I cared about what was happening in El Salvador, and I wanted to express my feelings And the poster was a woman holding a dead child and screaming. It was very heavy, but it was heavy for that time. And it said no mas. But then the Gulf War broke out, the Gulf War, and I heard there was a protest along Mission Street. So I changed the words to no more. And I took that poster, still wet, stuck it on a stick and ran outside. And it became a protest poster about, no more killing in the Gulf War. So that's how, some of my art gets repurposed as I find other things that I care about. So it's, as I said, it gets fluid that way. So was that an activist act? But I just saw something that I had to do and just ran to the street with it. And that's how I view my art in general.
That's so interesting, Nancy. I feel like I also have trouble claiming that my work is activism, but for a very different reason. I think just for me, it's because I don't see my work leading to any like concrete changes in the world. I think that doesn't mean that what I do isn't important. Last night, when Laura Nito and I were organizing that event, like to give people a space to talk about the anti-Asian hate crimes that have been happening recently. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I can call that activism because it doesn't lead to anything, but it does give people a space where their emotions are like held up as something valuable, and I think that is important. But I don't know if I would call it activism.
Well, I just want to say that, when I went to a mostly white art school in Brooklyn, New York, and I was concerned with, getting my degree and all the rest of it. But I heard a dual art, a singing group, Chris and Joanne, who sang songs about Asian American history and culture and identity. She's called Nobuko now, but before it was Chris and Joanne. And I ran outside and hearing those songs changed something in me. That's the activist part. I don't know if I would be here with a career doing what I do if I didn't hear those songs and have it resonate so much with me that I wanted to know more about the Asian American movement. And when I joined, then I brought my skills to that movement, which included filmmaking, and we documented a lot of things that were going on at that time. And it included mural painting and silkscreen later on. So I think art does have an active role in the protest movement, and it does change. You never know. Your poems are so wonderful. You never know when it clicks with somebody and their whole career just did a 180 and went somewhere else with it. So it will have an effect. It will have a ripple effect. You just don't know where or when.
Well, thank you for saying that. I guess for me, it's just, I still like feel nervous about like claiming that word. I don't mean to like discount that sort of work. It's just, more my personal relationship with, to me, what it means to like change things.
I also like completely resonate with everything you're saying about claiming that word activist or activism in relation to your work. But I just want to say, like, for your work, and I know I've only known you a very short time, but it's been such an honor for me to see how you own your work in that sense, especially being so young. Because I'm just like, when I was 16, I don't know what I was doing. Like I literally wasn't doing anything. And it's so incredible to see the work you're doing and just like unapologetically taking up space, you know, even like for you to be speaking at events like this is representation in itself. Like especially just, yeah, I'm so proud, and I love to see it. Whether or not you claim the word activism, I think even in smaller ways, even if it's impacting people in smaller ways, that's still impact. So like I wouldn't be so quick to say that like it's not creating any lasting change in the world, because even like in little ways, like that is still change.
Yeah, thank you too. I'm really honored to like share this space with you two. I don't want to minimize like the impact that artists can have. I think that was just something more an insecurity that I have, but I'm sorry if I like am projecting that too far onto art in general.
Not at all. You have nothing to apologize for. I feel like this is an insecurity that like a lot of artists have. It's definitely something that I face on an everyday basis. But like I remind myself that like even if like today, like at this point of time, the only change that my work is doing, or the only impact my work is doing, is like changing the perspective of my conservative as family members. Like even if like that's the only work it's doing in this moment of time, it is still one perspective. And then when they stop sending these like whack ass messages on their WhatsApp groups, like stop forwarding that stuff to like the whole world, like that's still one little piece of change that can have a ripple effect. And ultimately it's like that's the intention, right? Like even if today you're just impacting a small group of people, like later on you may be impacting more, and I think that's fine, honestly. Like
thank you for that reminder.
A lot of people are now using the word transformative. So I see a generational shift here from word revolutionary to social justice, and now we talk about transformative. But the question is the ripple effect that, as people are writing in the chat, I'm just echoing what is written there. What are the ripple effects? Transforming yourself versus, or rather, how the bridge happens between transforming yourself and transforming the world and the community and those around you. So those are the difficult questions, but we could unpack them in another panel about transformative art. Right now, we have two more questions that I can ventriloquize. One is back to the creation of the ecosystem where Asian American art can be sustainable, and it's from Alan de Souza, who's asking where there is a need for more Asian American curators, and what specifically would you like to see happening within art schools and academic, those kind of institutions. They are already the most open to community or like politically conscious art. So is there any suggestion of change you want to see? Yeah, let's go with that.
Well, I might say something just because I probably have the least experience with that. But just I did perform at this event called Quiet Lightning semi-recently, where the structure of it was these people originally invited 4 or 5 artists of color and poets specifically to read, and then after that each of the poets got to invite someone else to that event afterwards. And I think that sort of community curation, I had never seen that before, and I think it's a really cool model that I would want to see like other places use.
Yeah, I a lot of us are self-taught curators. I was lucky to have a job, a CEDAR job, Comprehensive Employment Training Act, when I first came to San Francisco. And I was thrust in the role of training to be a curator at large. But essentially, all it meant was we trained ourselves. None of us really knew how to do it, and we just took the bull by the horns and did it. But it would be good to actually have taken a course. None was offered at Pratt where I went, on how to curate and how to amass a wide range of art and what to look for and stuff like that. And I have always been a community artist and circulated among community organizations. And so we all taught each other. But the larger issue is the formal curation and also cultivating buyers of art and educating people on Asian American art. Because a lot of times, when you think of Asian art, you collect a certain type that you like, but there's a wide range of Asian American art that you may not always think of, like my work or somebody else's work as Asian, fitting your stereotype of what Asian American art should be and what value that it should have. I look at, I'm actually part of some Chicano shows because there was a curator. I'm in a show right now at the Smithsonian, but it's all about Chicano art, except for me, because there was a curator who came around and thought the art was valuable. And he started collecting all these posters back in the 70s. And somehow he collected mine along with everybody else's, because I also hung around Chicano community institutions like Mission Cultural Center or Galleria. He happened to have a poster of mine, and then it's shown right now as part of his permanent collection. But my point is that there was somebody who recognized the value of those posters and collected them. And so that's what I mean by an ecosystem. But we, and AWA is doing a fabulous job, but we need more of that.
So we only have time for one more question, even if there are a couple floating around. I'm gonna channel the one by Jenny and Phil regarding the question of what happens when if you consider, or if you have done that relation back to Menaja's point, when you show your artwork to your family, your art, how does that, Nancy talked about kind of a break with her family culture. Menaja is honoring her ancestry, their ancestry, and this whole question of the transformation of the self, but also the transformation of the people around you're an artist. If you want to comment on that, and that will wrap up.
My family was never really into art. I didn't even have a crayon in the house until I went to school. Of course, they saw me creating art when I was living there and going to school, but they always thought it was very strange. And because they thought it was very strange, then I felt that I couldn't really show them what I was doing. And unfortunately, they passed away before I could do some of the work that I did to honor my parents or their ancestry. So Yeah, it's hard, but on the other hand, I feel like you do have to go home again. So I try now to, what relatives I have, to at least let them know what I'm doing.
I think for my parents, I guess their relationship to my work has been pretty uncomplicated. They've been very supportive. I'm really appreciative. And then with my extended family, I do sometimes wish that my grandparents had been around my Asian grandparents had been around to see the things I would have done in my career. Like my grandfather on my mom's side he was a painter, and he was also a poet, and I don't know, I think seeing that intersection could have been really valuable for both of us, but it just didn't really happen.
I think part of the reason why I became a graphic artist was because my parents couldn't understand fine art. I wanted to be, painting in the fields like Van Gogh, but it didn't happen because they said, well, you can go to art school as long as you can prove that you can make money from the art. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who had parents who told them that. But I did listen to them, and I'm ever grateful to my parents for saying that. Not that I made any money, but it gave me the skills I needed to visually communicate an idea. And that has really helped me with my silkscreen work and even my mandala work, how to succinctly communicate an idea visually.
Okay, time is pretty much ended for Q&A. I'm sorry, there's a question in the Q&A directed to Greer, but she can type an answer, and we should pass the mic back to Diana for the closing.
Oh yeah, I'm actually going to pass the mic to Melanie, who will make some announcements about our Emerging Curators program.
So yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit to, as we talk about the arts ecosystem and the work that AWA is doing, one thing that I think can speak to some of the questions that were out there as well is we do have an Emerging Curators program that I and Michelle Lee have formalized, just because we know how important it is to train people to be in those positions, making the decisions, being at the table, having those positions of power, and that how that creates equity and brings, like that way, that is one way that we can increase our representation, not just in the art world, but in the world in general, is to really do that. And so I just wanted to plug our program really quickly, because some of the folks here, like Diana Lee, she's a graduate of that program, and she is now going on to work for AWA and curate exhibitions at SOMARTS and other places. And I think that mentorship that's built into the program is really important too, because because the work that we are doing now is obviously a product of our intergenerational legacy of the work Nancy has done, of the work other generations have done. And so we wanted to build upon that with that program, is, building in the framework of how we lift each other up and how we make more space so that in the future, there will be more of us putting our work out there and being able to tell our stories, so that it's not just Asian American art or women's art, it will just be part of the art world and the art ecosystem in general. And so that is a lot of what AWA does, especially with our Emerging Curators program. We know there are not enough women of color in those positions of power. So yeah, so that's a little bit of the work that we're doing. And I agree with Nancy, there just needs to be more folks out there training and putting women of color in those positions. So yeah, I just wanted to close out with that. But thank you everyone for your conversation, your openness, your speaking your truths and sharing your work. Just sitting here and being witness to everything that you're offering today. It's really healing for me, especially this week. And I just want to say how much I appreciate it, and how here at AWA, like, this is the exact kind of things we want to see more of, and we want to promote, and we want other people to see the value in, is like, yeah, it's just all of this. So thank you. Thank you, Laura, for moderating.
Connecting to the note about academia and connecting and like just changing the sphere of the arts ecosystem. The Slide Slam next week is also going to host not just 10 artists, but also I think 5 to 6 or more special guests who are involved in academia. They're researchers, they're curators. So if you want to connect with us there, you can go to our website on our events page and register, because it's one of the few opportunities throughout the year that we get to like have all these different arts professionals and artists in one room together. So that's an opportunity to connect and kind of think about that ecosystem as well. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to all of our panelists and Laura for moderating. Take a look at Local Invisibility, Postcolonial Feminisms, share it with your professors, your colleagues and whatnot. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great day and a restful weekend, and that you're all able to find some light and peace this weekend. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for organizing in this difficult time, especially.